Hey everyone, welcome. This is another amazing episode of the Brave Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Jena Rodriguez, and I am your business and brave strategist, helping entrepreneurs really understand how to price, package, and profit from their expertise. And I do that through helping them speak up and scale their business. So I'm so excited to enter this new year. This is our first couple episodes of the new year, and what a year it's been so already. So I'm excited to have Stephanie on board with us, Stephanie Scapa, and we're going to learn all about her inside of her business and her world and her new home and all of those exciting things going on for her. But I just want to say really quick, thank you so much for making this show the show that it is. And obviously it's not a show without listeners and downloads and all of that. And I just appreciate so much your feedback and your input and your watching and listening and engagement. So if you get something out of this episode today, especially, please let us know. I know Stephanie would appreciate it. I certainly do. We want to hear from you. We want to know what's going on for you and what your biggest takeaways are. So without further ado, help me welcome Stephanie. How are you today?
Hi, thank you for having me.
I am so excited. You're so welcome. We made this happen, right?
Finally.
We had a few reschedules, and I'm just really excited to meet you and get to know you as well and share your brilliance and your story with the world. So please take a second and just kind of introduce you to the world. Like what's up in your business and in your life?
Absolutely. So my name is Stephanie Scapa. I am the co-founder and CEO of Wave, which is a digital entertainment platform. So it's a streaming app that has music, magazines, ebooks, and soon podcasts.
Awesome.
I actually have been working on this for 7 years, believe it or not. Wow. But we just launched Wave about a year ago. So it's only been available in the App Store and out to the public for 1 year. So it's been sort of a long journey for me, for sure.
Yeah.
And I actually am kind of unusual because I have a second day job where I am running the corporate development team for our parent company. And so it's a little bit an unusual story for me, but things are hectic like any entrepreneur.
Unbelievable. So the parent company of Wave, is that what you're saying?
Yep.
You're
Exactly.
actively helping them inside, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep. So first of all, spell Wave, because I know it's spelled differently.
Yeah. So it's spelled WEYV.
Yeah. Wave. Okay. WEYV.com, right? Is that how they can access it? Okay, great. And so tell us a little bit about that journey. So were you a part of the company first and then Wave became an idea, or how did it all come to be?
So for me, the idea of Wave actually was already patented before me.
Okay.
But I helped initially to sort of found it as part of an organization, let's say, and as a startup, and to bring it to life. So for us, it's a little unusual because I do have a parent company that is responsible and funding Wave. So on that side, the funding aspect is not something that I have to worry about, but it's still set up as a separate, entity, a separate company. And we still have many of the challenges as a startup, especially going into such a competitive space with Spotify, Apple, Google, Amazon, everybody large and scary.
Yeah. The large scary monsters that we love.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, there still have been many, many hurdles that we've had to overcome. Luckily, funding isn't one of them, though.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great, honestly, because that's one of the biggest hurdles any startup goes through. And so what are your hurdles? Give us an example.
Yeah, the absolute number one hurdle is getting content. So for us at this point on the music side, we have deals in place with Universal, Sony, Warner, Merlin, all the big labels. And it was quite a challenge to be a startup without a lot of leverage in the negotiations to get content. And then, on the magazine side, Time Inc., before they were acquired by Meredith, we have all their magazines now, and Bonnier Corp on the publishing side as well. And so it's really been sort of a journey. I mean, highlights, cricket, lots of children's books.
Yeah. So tell us, I mean, now I'm really curious, like, how did you overcome that? You know, how did you create a point of differentiation and the leverage that got you in the door or got the yes?
Yeah. So for us with the labels, the biggest thing is you have to remember they're talking to you in the first place. Because,
Right.
it's a
Step
little
one.
bit intimidating, to think about why would they provide their content, which is really their value out to just any startup. And the key for them is diversification. So like
Gotcha.
any other investor, let's say, you want to have a diversified portfolio. So for them, they really view working with startups in that way where yes, they obviously have agreements with all the major players already, but they don't want any one player to be too dominant. And so
Gotcha.
one of the ways to avoid that is by allowing startups to grow and flourish in the ecosystem. So for us,
Love
that
that.
was, yeah, it was one of the things that really got us in the door, I would say, for the discussion. And then we weren't really a Me Too business model. We're very unusual. And so they liked the fact that we were a very unique concept. And because we're not venture funded, we're in
Hmm.
it for the long run. And so we're willing to do longer agreements and really trying to think about long term rather than sort of short term hope we succeed in a year or two. So it made
Right.
us a unique prospect, I would say. But yeah, it took a lot of negotiation and patience.
Yeah, because you said you've been in the game with this idea 7 years.
Yeah, 7 years.
Yeah.
And it took us 3 years to get our contracts done with the labels.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it definitely was a journey.
I mean, for sure, and still is, right? We're now just in that kind of fresh new honeymoon stage, the first year or so.
Exactly.
So tell
Exactly.
me, because I'm sure inquiring minds want to know, at least mine does. So tell us a little more about the Brave, and maybe start with. I usually ask this like later in the call, but like, what does Brave mean to you, first and foremost?
So to be a brave entrepreneur, I mean, I think the first thing is every entrepreneur, I think, is brave just
Agreed.
for taking the courage to become an entrepreneur. It's
Yep.
even, for us who is not venture funded, I give up so much of my time and energy, and my team is 100% dedicated on Wave. And so it takes a lot of courage and effort to jump into that, I would say, to start. But the next thing I would say is, as an entrepreneur, you have to be brave enough to ask the dumb question. Unless
Mm,
you happen to be a serial entrepreneur, which I don't think many people are, you really don't know what you're getting into until you're doing it. And most likely that means new industry, new concepts that you aren't aware of and you don't know the grounds on. And it can be daunting to ask a question that you sort of feel like is going to be perceived as something you should know and you
right.
don't. But you have to just get over that and be brave enough to ask.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, because number one, I agree with you wholeheartedly. That's why I call it the brave entrepreneur, because just the nature of entrepreneur is brave. And my company is called Brave Masters because that's who I believe we all are, is brave masters. Like, we are mastering this brave thing because we've said yes to this kind of scary world, and yet rewarding world. And then the fact that you speak to asking what appears to be a dumb question or a question already to be known, right?
Mhm.
And I love that approach, because I think the bravest thing we can be is student, right? Like, be
Yeah.
the student, be the the one to learn. And if we are the one to learn the fastest by like, ask the questions, then that can allow us to be the leader, and
Yep.
then therefore the teacher. I learned so much by teaching, but I also learned by being the one asking, right? And just continuing
Yeah.
to grow in that way. So thank you for that perspective. And so speak to, like, the beginning, like, I guess go back to the getting this even off the ground, and what you had to kind of come through mindset wise and courage wise, bravery wise, in order to stay this long. I mean, 7 years or 6 years, obviously, until you kind of got to the launch part, is a long time, you know, and I think most people give up in 3 months. You know?
Yeah, I'm sure that is very true.
Yeah.
So for me, what I gave up originally was I was at Cisco. I was an IT analyst.
Okay.
And to do this project, I really fell in love with the concept of Wave. And so I quit my job and I started Wave. And at the same time, I joined the parent company because at that time, there wasn't a dedicated team for Wave. And so that was the choice I had to make. I had to sort of give up the path I was on to do something completely different.
Wow.
And it was a hard choice to make. There is no question. And then from there, I started to learn, and we made tons of mistakes in the beginning. So, you know, first we decided we were going to outsource development, which did not go well for us because when you don't have enough control over your development, it's very hard to really put out a good product long term. You know, there were many things when you're outsourcing your development for a product like this where the company may decide to take a shortcut for something to be done immediately, but won't necessarily be the best way in the long run.
Right.
And so we ended up having to literally start over after a year and a half on the development because we just had to scrap everything they did. That was a big lesson learned. But I mean, it was what we had to do. And I think that's one of the biggest things as an entrepreneur. You have to be willing to sort of cut your losses and go to the next thing, which can be super hard to do. And the same thing on the design side, by the way, you know, was one of the reasons we started from scratch is the designs that we originally had. We just felt like once we got the product in our hand, it wasn't usable enough. And so we scrapped everything, started over. And
you know, that, not to interrupt you, but what I'm hearing as you're speaking is there's this paradigm that I think exists where, you know, it's like, well, oh, this didn't work. You know, I mean, you've spent a year, you've done all this work and it's not working. Okay, this must be a sign that I shouldn't do this. Right? There's this I think there's this conversation out there that people like, because it's like our egos and our, you know, that part of us that wants to keep us safe and find the reasons why we shouldn't keep going, you know, it'll find whatever reason in order to like try to pull you back out of it. And so what does it take? What did you have to have? Like, who did you have to become in order to say, that's just a mistake or a misstep? It doesn't mean the whole idea is scrapped. How did you like frame that in order to keep moving?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I do sort of. So, I mean, I think the first thing was trusting my team.
Yeah.
Because, you know, for us, when we looked at the development, we originally, what the team had done, the outsourcing team, when our in-house development team looked it over, they basically said this was designed and built from a technical standpoint as a prototype. And so this isn't going to scale. And that made it a little bit easier, I would say. And then, to be honest, I think the biggest thing for me on the design of the app side was to overcome my own biases. And I really had to acknowledge them before I could overcome them. And that was the biggest thing for me was I loved the design of the original app. I mean, I was a huge fan of it. I signed off on it. I fell in love with it. And I had to recognize by user feedback, really putting the app into somebody else's hands and just watching them, not telling them what to do, just seeing what they did, that it wasn't that great. It wasn't clear. It took them too many clicks to get where they wanted to be. I mean, all of those things. And so once I took my own biases away, it was pretty obvious.
You know, I love that. And that's where I think, you know, like really understanding your market, allowing them to give you some input because they're ultimately the user. They're ultimately the ones that are going to buy into your idea. And so for you to speak to, you know, that acknowledging your biases conversation, I think is really like an anchoring point that I want people to get. And I've seen that in my own world. Even it's like I can go design my beautiful website, and it's like my branding, and and all these things that I put out there. And if it doesn't resonate with the people looking, and and it's like it's not really creating the effect that I'm looking for, even though I think it looks great, then what's the point, right? Like it's not really doing its job. And so I just think you've done an amazing job of being able to trust others, which I think is a brave step alone, because I think people like, oh, I can do it better. I can do it the best, and I'll do it myself, and all of those things that we hold on to, and then being able to let go of some of our own opinions and our own biases. I think that's really, really smart. And so once you like restarted, like, okay, scratch that. What happened next? Like what was that next brave thing you really had to come up against?
So the next big thing was the content then. So going out and talking to the content providers and trying to get content. And so the first decision that we had to really make there was, where do we start? Because for us, we're a digital entertainment platform, which means all kinds of digital entertainment. And we actually started with movie studios. And so we went and we met with Warner Brothers and with Miramax and Paramount, and I mean, many of the different movie studios, just to sort of learn and understand all the pieces we didn't know. We weren't in the entertainment industry before. Right. I wasn't. I had no background. And so mostly it was just to understand, how does this work? What happens? What does it take to get content? And slowly we started to understand, okay, well, there's multiple pieces. You have to license the content. Then you have to make sure you can deliver the content. And so we started to understand the problem in more depth, and then break it down and decide we were going to start with music first. And so that was sort of the biggest next decision that we made.
Yeah. And for those people listening, I'm channeling their questions. No, I'm just kidding. They're probably my questions first, right? And so when you don't know an industry, and number one, that can just like approaching those companies, and kind of opening the door. Number one, what door do you open? How do you even get in the door? And you don't have to necessarily say how, but it's like, how did you figure out how to get in the door to even have those kind of conversations, and let go of any intimidation that, may exist?
Well, it's kind of funny. So the first thing is, it's all networking. You have to know the right people to get the first meeting. It's 100% networking.
Yes.
But then from there, I remember the very first meeting we went to, and I was so nervous. I was like sweating through my jacket. I was so nervous. And I was like practically shaking. And then at the end of it, I sort of realized, well, we're just here to learn and to make new friends, so to speak, and kind of explore. And so there's nothing to be so nervous about. They're just people on the other side. And some of it also was my own youth, because I hadn't been in business in general for that long. And so it was really all learning at the same time for me. But very quickly, you sort of understand that the other side isn't trying to make your life difficult and more challenging.
They're not monsters.
Exactly. And there's nothing you need to be nervous about. You just have to be open and communicative and ask questions and listen.
Yeah, I love that, because I think certainly some of the most pivotal moments in my life and my business, certainly over the last 12, 13 years, is the moments where I am sweating and nervous and scared and doing it anyway, and realizing that the after effect, and it's kind of like standing on a stage for the first time, was pretty damn scary. Even doing this podcast 4 years ago, I'm like, I'm nervous. Of course, I minimized my nerves because I brought a friend to the first episode. I'm like, I know this person loves me. I'm just going to have her as my first guest, right? But, any of those times where you put yourself in some nerve-wracking, number one, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think a lot of our nerves obviously are self-imposed, meaning it's what we're thinking and how we're positioning it in our minds, meaning they're bigger than us, they know more than me, whatever. You're putting them on a pedestal. yeah, thinking I'm just speaking to Paramount, might be intimidating. But I think when you can really break it down to like, wait a minute, we're just having a human to human conversation. And what's the worst that could happen is they say no thank you or whatever, and just really be willing to walk in the space and walk in the nerves and then walk out. It's like, it's not the end of the world, but it could be the beginning of one, right?
Exactly.
And so I just really commend you on that bravery, because I think half the time people come up with the reasons why they can't take that first appointment or make the first contact or get on the stage for the first time or whatever it is, right?
And very often you hear I'm not ready. It's not ready yet, or we're not ready. And you're never ready.
You're never ready. Oh my gosh.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And do you remember being ready at that moment, or you just pulled the trigger?
No.
Right? Heck no. I love it. Thank you for being honest about that, because I think you're right. That's one of the biggest things I hear is like, I'm going to go get prepared. I'm like, like, how much can you be prepared? Right.
Yeah. And actually what I've sort of learned over time is I almost was too prepared for the first meeting. And the way I mean that is I had a full PowerPoint presentation and I had practiced 100 times and I was so ready. And I realized after the first couple of meetings that nobody wants to be lectured with a PowerPoint.
Right.
And so you're almost better to know your stuff, but not be so set on your plan, and just be able to, relax and sort of go with the flow and hear the other side, understand what they're telling you and take notes and ask weird questions.
Yeah. I love that advice because, that goes across all boards. Even in this conversation, the reason I do this podcast is I don't have a script. I want us to have a conversation. And so who knows what the person's going to say, but if you know you, and you know why you're doing what you're doing and what your purpose is to be on the show or be in the room or whatever, or be on that stage, then you can let it show up the way it perfectly needs to. It's like, let it flow. And because it's interesting. I don't know if this resonates with you, but it's like, it's the difference for me between being in my head and being in my heart, and like really connecting with the people in the room, whatever that room is. High-powered meeting or a client or podcast guest, right? Yeah, so I think that's really a powerful message for people to listen to, because you're never ready. Like, pull the trigger. Even if you like bomb the first meeting, it's like at least you got started.
Yep, right? And there'll be a second one.
And there'll be a second. Yeah, exactly. And so after all these years, now you've launched it. What's kind of the next lesson you've learned?
The next lesson I have really learned is, now that we're out in the public, you have to really listen to the user feedback. And I think this can be a little bit confusing, because what the user says through support channels and verbally is not always accurate, in the sense that, you may have the user telling you, this is what I like most about the app. But then if you actually go through your usage, and for us, we track the user's behavior so that we can better understand what the users actually do like. What users have told us in the past doesn't always line up with exactly what's true for how they're using the app. And so it's important to sort of understand all the different channels that the user provides feedback on, and to weigh them each appropriately. So that was one of the biggest challenges I would say we're still trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Because while we track data, we haven't quite figured out how to use it appropriately. And so it's one of the things we're working on. We just hired somebody a couple months ago to focus on user engagement. And so she's digging in on all our data and understanding, okay, here are some things that clearly we can improve, and here are some things that the users seem to like. And yeah.
I love this because, obviously just in business, maybe you're not a tech company or an app or any of that, but it's like, I always talk to at least my clients about, metrics tracking, right? Metrics analysis and things like that. So whatever the metrics are in your business, whether it's marketing metrics and feedback and social media engagement, or, listeners and downloads, like as far as a podcast, or it's literally watching how people click and move through an app or whatever it is. You still have to step back into a macro level and go, what's really important here to understand, and what's the predominant theme or, like overarching, effect, versus like the micro level where it's like per person, you're trying to solve everybody's problem.
Right.
Because it's still just opinion. It's still, someone else's bias, right?
Right.
Like what they prefer. And yet, does it really speak to your primary target, or speak to your, primary reason why you're doing what you're doing? Have you ever fallen off track of staying aligned with who you guys really are versus what you're hearing from the market? I mean, does that make sense?
It does. I don't think we've been in market long enough to
Okay,
have had that opportunity
Yeah.
yet. I mean, the closest I would say we've come is, originally we had this concept of connecting charities into the app. So the idea is that an artist would choose a charity of their choice. And the more you listen to that artist, the more we would donate to that artist's charity. And so we were donating basically a % of our revenue, divided based on listening. And we thought that that would be awesome. The artist would get engaged, the user would get engaged, and we would be socially responsible as an organization. And so we loved it. We launched it, and it sort of just flopped.
People didn't value it.
No, people didn't value it. The artists weren't engaged. The users sort of didn't care. And I mean, it's been a learning, and that's okay. We're pulling it, and it doesn't mean it can't come back later. I certainly think that as we grow, it could be something interesting in the future, but at least for right now, it's not the right move.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I actually tried something myself over like a year and a half ago where, when people invest in themselves, I invest in a more of a charity organization, and they get to give in some way back to the world, right? At large, kind of a charity approach, right? That social responsibility, and yet it didn't land. It's like, it was a good idea, and I think people's hearts are, yes, great, but it's not where the value was. It's like they didn't value that enough to take action. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So we just, it can show up maybe in a different way versus that method that we chose.
Right.
Yeah. So I get that. Yeah. So that's good. I just, I think that's something that entrepreneurs listening, would definitely benefit from, is being willing to look at, number one, create the data. I think a lot of people don't even create the data. They're out there just feeling their way through the minutia of everything going on in their business. And so they don't really have any data to create the facts versus the feeling. And then be able to discern, what's really happening with the data, and what is it really telling us? And so I guess the other question I have, is why Wave? Like, what's the purpose, and why did you create it? And like, what's the real reason it needs to exist in the world? So kind of like your mission statement, I guess.
Absolutely. So for us, we really think that sort of the way we consume content as people will say is a little bit broken. Okay. So, if you look at, the easy example here are podcasts. Most podcasts are free, and it's valuable. There is IP and energy and effort put into them, and they aren't monetized in the right way. There might be advertising, but advertising is effectively selling your personal data, which people don't love, but don't move around, we'll say. And so we really feel like there's an opportunity to shift the digital economy, actually. So our big goal here is actually much broader, because we think that from a business model perspective, we want to make sure content creators and rights holders are compensated fairly with a model that works for a user still, that gives the flexibility they want as a family, because most people consume digital content as a family, and not necessarily a family in the sense of how Apple thinks about it. You have to be in the same household or something like that. We don't care. It can be 25 of your closest friends that make up your family.
Yeah,
25
community
people in your community or family, however you view it, and you're able to share access. And we think about it a little bit like a library card, where you have basically all this content that you can take advantage of that you're checking in and out. And when you're listening to content, it's checked out. But as soon as you pause it or you close the book you're reading, it checks back in and somebody else can check something out in your group. And so you're choosing like the level of access basically that you want for your group to have. And then everybody shares it.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. Well, I'm certainly excited to check it out myself. I was very curious, and thanks for sharing kind of that inside view of what this company's all about, and certainly your journey in it. And I will check it out, especially being a podcaster. Like, interesting. And what opportunity is there? Yeah. So, cause I think there really is always an opportunity to shift what it's kind of like, not going with what is, but what can be. And you're creating a new dialogue, a new way of, approaching, the users and the people out there and consuming information. So I think that's really cool. So I thank you so much for being here, and thank you for just being really open and honest about your journey, and what a cool idea and concept. And I can't wait for people to kind of dive into it and check it out. So would you do me a favor and share with everyone how to either connect with you if you want that, or the product itself, the digital platform?
Yeah, I can do both. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Awesome. But also we have a little gift. So the first 500 people who enter the promo code BRAVE when they sign up at wave.com, WEYV.com, will get 2 months free of Wave.
I love it. Thank you. I even have my own promo code.
Exactly. And thank you so much for having me. I really hope I can help others.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I think this was a very, interesting conversation. Like, you brought in some great points that I think people need to really listen to. So yeah, thank you so much. I think this was great. And so, yeah, everyone listening and watching, please check out her website and her LinkedIn profile, connect with Stephanie, but more importantly, go grab the one of 500 seats in her platform, Wave, WEYV.com, right? Did I say it right? And that way you can be kind of the innovator and the early adopter of this really amazing platform. So thank you again, Stephanie. I appreciate you being here, and for everyone watching. So thank you so much. I have one last question I almost forgot to ask. So, this is like the profound moment, is if this was your last interview, I know you said it was your first video, but if this was your last interview and last chance to really shed a message on the world, what would that message be?
So my favorite message is give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think we all, especially as entrepreneurs, can appreciate it. But in general, we tend to not naturally. And I think if the world just did that, it would be a lot nicer.
We'd be a whole different world, right? A little compassion, right?
Yeah.
I like that. I love ending on that note. I think that's a brilliant message to share. So take note, everyone, and please let us know what your biggest takeaway was overall. And we appreciate you watching and listening and being a part of the Brave movement. And thank you again, Stephanie.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Let's go get our Brave on. See you next time.